I have played way, way too much Dark and Darker since the release of the game. I have leveled every single class to 20 and I've played all of them extensively. That being said, I've never played a class that could do this. And there's so much of this that Warlock can do. There's so many little gimmicks and quirks to it. And I think this is why people are so polarized when evaluating the class. It's extremely polarizing based on if you have magic healing, based on what spells you took, whether you're running Phantasm or BOC. This is a class that's really hard to evaluate. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about, is Warlock OP or does it suck? With the recent changes to gear, every single class scales ridiculously hard with gear. However, Warlock scales way harder than any other class. This is for two main reasons. One, magic healing is absurdly powerful on Warlock. I mean, the difference between 0 magical healing and like 5 or 6 magical healing, you're not even playing the same game. It's just not even comparable. And on top of that, Warlock really struggles with spell capacity, whereas other classes don't. So with most classes, you can get all the spells you want without having to worry about knowledge. With Lock, you actually start quite a bit behind and need to get a decent amount of spell capacity to run your spells. So this creates a really polarized evaluation where when Lock has magic healing and has spell slots, it's not even the same class compared to when it doesn't. There's an additional problem with gear because there's a breakpoint where your Curse of Pain will tick for 2 damage instead of 1 damage. And I think there's also going to be a breakpoint where it ticks for 3. And the point is that you need tons of plus magic damage and tons of willpower, and then all of a sudden you're going to go from doing 1 damage to tick to 2 damage to tick. So it's literally going to double the dot damage. And this breakpoint also contributes to the difficulty of evaluating the class, because the difference between doing, 16 damage and doing 8 damage with the dot, pretty big difference. Warlock's fights are also highly based on the movement speed between you and your opponent. If you're faster than them and they're playing Barbarian or Fighter, you can just kite them to the end of the world. But if they're faster than you, it feels like there is nothing you can do, and they just will run you down and beat the shit out of you. There's so many times where a Barbarian just gets his hands out, he's running light foots and full movement speed, and he just W keys at me and there's nothing I can do. See, the thing about Warlock, if you're playing Mage and you hit somebody with a fireball, it's going to push them back. If you're playing Ranger and you shoot somebody with a bow, it's going to slow them. The thing about Lock is you don't have any kind of crowd control like this, whereas other classes have it built into their kit inherently. A class like Mage also has something like Magic Missiles, which is a huge deterrent to getting into melee range because they'll nuke you. And of course, Ranger has the Spray Shot, and that also has really high effect against melee classes. Warlock has Blow of Corruption, but it feels really difficult to use because it's so hard to get enough damage on them before they get to you to kill them because you have no CC. And I think this is also partly what's so polarizing about the class. If you're playing like Barbarian and the Warlock is faster than you, it doesn't matter how many axes you throw, it doesn't matter how many projectiles you hit him with, the Warlock is just going to heal up and kite you to the death. But if the Barbarian is faster than the Warlock, you're just going to get run down and beat to death, and there's going to be nothing you can do. Warlock's matchups are also extremely polarizing based on what spells they take. For example, if you're fighting another Warlock, or if you're fighting a Mage, if you're fighting a Cleric, Eldritch Shield is going to put in so much work. I had a fight earlier where my friend died and I was 1v2 versus 2 mages, and I just had 1 magical healing, and I was just spamming Eldritch Shield before I would go poke with them, and as soon as they break the shield, I'd just refresh it because I have infinite spell slots and infinite health. And it felt impossible for the mages to win. However, a lot of Locks aren't playing with Eldritch Shield, and without it, I would have gotten absolutely rinsed. And this is the thing. Like, your spell choices on Lock, it is not at all settled what the meta is. And based on, if you have Eldritch Shield and you run into a mage, you're going to be able to actually beat them. But without Eldritch Shield, you're probably just going to get rinsed. And I noticed the same thing actually with Flamewalker. I started playing Flamewalker to try to deal with melee classes, and all of a sudden, they couldn't chase me anymore. I could just run away with Flamewalker, and they couldn't chase me. But then I ran into a mage, and he just fireballed me to death. And so this is kind of where so much of the polarization comes from, because if you're fighting a Warlock and they have 6 magical healing and they have Eldritch Shield and you're playing a mage, it's going to feel like you can't kill them. But if you run into the same Warlock and he has 3 magical healing and he's playing Flamewalker instead of the Eldritch Shield, you're probably just going to run him over. Warlock's matchups are also extremely polarizing. We already talked about how movement speed decides fights against fighters and barbarians, but against a class like Cleric, your dots don't work, and thus your healing doesn't work, because Cleric has a passive that reduces all incoming damage by 3, and all of your dots tick for less than 3, meaning that they don't proc Torture Mastery. This creates a huge issue for Locke because it is so difficult for them to kill Clerics. And they have a similar matchup with Rangers, where Rangers could just shoot them to death, and it feels like oftentimes if you get caught by a Ranger, there's nothing you can do. And mages are similar, where if you have Eldritch Shield, it feels like you have options, but if you don't, a lot of times it feels like you just get run over by mages. That being said, if you're playing Eldritch Shield and you have the right position, and you can take them on. But Warlock really struggles to kill people who are more geared than them because A, Warlock really needs gear to function properly, but B, Warlock's damage is really low. Like if you're playing a Rogue or a Ranger, like let's use Ranger as an example. If you're playing Ranger and somebody's like running at you, right? And you just have a white longbow and you just shoot him 3 times in the head, you can kill somebody who's way more geared than you. Locke doesn't really have an equivalent to this. With Locke, they would really have to make serious mistakes and take a lot of extra curses of pain, maybe a couple bolts of darkness, before they get into melee range with you, and then you burst them with BOC. But that just isn't really realistic because you don't have a way to secure these spell cast like Ranger does with a slow on hit. And I think like Warlock, if they outgear you, feels impossible to beat. They're healing so much, they're faster than you can't get away, you can't push them. But if you outgear them, it is brutal for the Warlock. It is so hard to kill anything, and it's so hard to win fights. Look, the point that I'm trying to make is I don't suck, Locke sucks. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, leave a like and a sub. I'll see you guys later. Peace out.